100 years, 100 voices. A St. John Centennial Oral History project conceived and produced by WSJS Radio, where every day is history.
This is WSJS Radio, where every day is history, and I'm Claudia, and I'm here to interview my dad, Claudio. So, when did you start St. John's?
I got to St. John's in 1978. So I started the school year with 8th grade, and I was here till my senior year in 1983. When I got to St. John's, we came from Venezuela. I did my 7th grade in Venezuela. I did my 4th to 6th grade in Guatemala, and I did my earlier years here in Puerto Rico. I was in 2nd grade once. And so we went from Chile to Venezuela to Puerto Rico to Guatemala to Venezuela to Puerto Rico again. So we were traveling. It was almost like a military family. So throughout the whole process, my mother, who's brilliant, knew that English was going to be a very important language to learn. And I started back in Venezuela in 4th grade in American schools that had a curriculum based in English. And when we came to Puerto Rico for the second time, she knew, I don't know how she found out, but she knew that St. John's was the premier school in Puerto Rico for American-speaking people. And she pushed me to learn English, to be very, very good at English, because she knew that I wanted to go to the States for college. So she said, even though we didn't have that much money back then, and even in the late 70s and 80s, St. John's was still a very expensive school. She said, you know what, I'd rather spend all my money in good education, because that's something that nobody's going to take away from you. And I applaud her for doing that. It was one of the best things she ever did. And this is what I'm trying to do with you guys now. So I still believe St. John's is the best school in Puerto Rico, and I want you to go through what I did, because I really had a great time at St. John's.
What do you remember most about being a student here?
I remember that the school was really tiny, and it looked crowded all the time. I think that we had close to like 700 students back then, from pre-K to senior class, but we were all in the what you now know as the high school side, and there was only a couple of buildings and a big dirt field, and of course during recess everybody got out almost at the same time, and it was like Plaza Las Americas on a Saturday before Mother's Day. It was just chaotic, but it was a really nice sense of community. I mean, even though there were cliques, like there's cliques now, probably, you didn't have space to move too far from everybody. So everybody actually felt like it was part of the same group, even though there was groups within those groups. So that's what I remember the most. I mean, I really enjoyed coming to school. It was something fun, and that's my most pleasant memory.
What sports did you play?
Oh, my favorite sport, still is my favorite sport, is soccer. And I played junior varsity soccer in 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I moved to the varsity team. And I was captain of the team basically all through my high school. And we actually won 3 championships, even though we had to practice in other campuses. It's not like Baldwin or American Military Academy that they have their own soccer field. We had to go soccer practice in different venues. So it was a very long process for practicing, because we had to leave after school in a bus, go wherever the practice was, practice for 2-3 hours, and then come back. So I was getting home 6-7 at night the days that we had practice, and we had practice, if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 times a week during the season. So it was a very hectic schedule, but I loved it, and I got MVP my last year. But soccer took most of my time away. The other thing that I did that wasn't a school sport was surfing. I was a big surfer, and on D-days, I remember we had a double block for lunch. I used to bring my board, and I used to go out here in front of the school to surf for an hour, and then I would shower and go back to class in the afternoon.
How lucky is it that there were actually waves so close, right?
Back then the buildings here weren't here, so the whole coast was different, and there was a nice point break here called La Bomba, where that bomba is right now. They used to spew filthy water out into the sea back then. Nobody cared, I guess, at that point. We weren't as conscious of the environment as we were now. But I remember also that part of the gym class, there used to be a building called El Casino de Puerto Rico, right where El Parque del Indio is right now, and they had a pool, and that's what we did. Natación, we did it in there, and they had some basketball courts in there. So we used to walk along Ashford Avenue in a single line to go to our practices and our PE over there, because we didn't have a place to do PE here.
What was your favorite teacher back then, or like the one that you can remember the most?
Teacher that I loved the most and that I also hated the most was Jorge Rivera. When I came to St. John's, during the late part of the 8th grade and my 9th grade, my parents divorced. And my father left the island, and it was only my brother and I was 15 at the time, close to 15, and I didn't do that well with that. And I started doing things that I wasn't really supposed to be doing, and my grades plummeted, and Jorge Rivera took me under his wing and really straightened me out. He almost became like a pseudo dad to me. And thanks to him is that I rebounded my grades, and I actually finished with a 4.0 average senior year. The other thing that I loved about St. John's was that during my senior year, I was able to take between 11th and 12th grade, I took 5 AP courses. So when I got to college at Emory, my first semester was taken care of. I could take electives because all my math, my science, my foreign language, and my history were taken care of by the AP courses. So it was a very good preparation for college. I mean, this school really prepares you very well for college. I felt surrounded by kids who came from other schools from all over the country when I was at Emory, and I felt that they were lost, where I was so used to changing classes to go to one class to another, being free in my free time to do whatever else I wanted to do. We had passes to go out from the school. So if you're like in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade and you had a free period, you can go out and come back, and it was normal. So that sense of freedom that you got in high school, which is supposed to be very structured for you, gives you some insight of how college is going to be. And when you go to college, you don't feel like a caged lion out of the cage. You've been out of the cage for so long that you know how to manage your time correctly. So that was a very good thing that this school taught me. Because even though we're here, it looked like they weren't watching, they were watching very closely. And, if you did something wrong, those free periods went away. So back in the 80s, the computers weren't around. In 1983, we had Atari computers here that used to work on cassette tapes. If you wanted to play video game, I think you had Pong, Duke, 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 Duke. And that was about it. And then came out Donkey Kong and all these other asteroids. But you had to play those in big, huge consoles the size of a refrigerator. There used to be a place right across the street from the Ashford Hospital. It was like a game center. It was like a cafeteria, and it had pinball machines, and it had all these games. And everybody used to sneak out and go there and play. It was like 10 cents and a quarter for 2 minutes of playtime. And we used to spend all our money there. And of course, that's the place that everybody hung out during school, which was not supposed. We were not supposed to go there. We started going so much that it got banned. So you could go out, but then teachers would walk by to make sure that nobody was in there playing pinball or video games. And I got caught a couple of times in there. So, it was really healthy fun. It was a much more innocent time back then than it is now. So we had more freedom to do things than I think you guys do now.
What's the earliest memory you could think of?
In 8th grade, they were working on the class play, and I wasn't on the play, but I was part of the crew that did the setup. So I actually worked as part of the entourage, the backstage, and I had so much fun doing that. That's probably my earliest memory from St. John's. And Mr. Tom Hall was the director, and he was the English teacher. And I remember dissecting the frog, and mine was the only one that didn't die. I think I tried putting it back together. Then we euthanized them, but I had a really fun time doing that. And even back then, my favorite classes were math and science. Science to me came very easy. I remember Mrs. Kiley was our biology, and I remember learning all the bones of the body and all the muscles. And I used to sneak out on my free periods, and I used to go to the morgue at the Presbyterian Hospital and hang out with the people who did the morgue work. And I used to see the dead bodies, and it was a little morbid. I know it sounds a little morbid, but I really knew that back then that I was going to follow a medical field. And when I went to college, I went pre-med right off the bat. So I went to Emory for college, and then I went to medical school at Tufts, and I did my general and plastic surgery training at Northwestern in Chicago. So I knew way back in 8th grade with Mrs. Robles that I wanted to be a medical doctor. Don't ask me why, because there's no medical doctors in my family. But I remember the stimulation that came from doing science really forged me into what I am today.
Was there any special activities?
There was a bunch of stuff that you could do aside from scholastic stuff. There was a chess group, there was oratoria, there was French oratory, they had Model UN back then too. I think that the activities haven't changed. I think you have more activities now than we did back then. Yeah, I mean, you spend your time basically at the library, or at the dirt field, or outside of the school. So the activities were more outdoorsy. You did things outside more. We didn't have much to do inside a room other than read. There were no iPods, iPhones, there was no iPads, there was no computers to play with. So you really had to do things outside, and your activities had to be outside to have fun.
Since you were new in 8th grade, how did you make friends, so many friends?
Well, it was easy to make friends because it was such a small place. So Jorge introduced me to Jose Dubon. Well, I mean, I knew Jose, but I didn't hang out with him. And I started hanging out with Jose, and his family really took me in. To this day, Jose is my best friend, and I forged some really good friendships back then. I mean, I still have active engagements with people who were in high school with me. Not necessarily in my class, but I mean from other classes, because back then, even though if you were a senior, you still were hanging out with people in sophomore, and you're still hanging out with freshmen. It was a weird kind of social interaction, because during recess and during the free periods, since we had no place to go, we all hung out together. So it was normal for you to hang out with people from 10th grade when you were a senior, and vice versa. Some of those friendships are still very strong for me. I remember that we used to take a lot of road trips because of my surfing activities, and we used to get up in the morning very early and go to Arecibo. It took 4 hours to get there because the highway wasn't built, and I don't know if I would feel as comfortable as my mother felt letting me out as I would with my daughter today. If she told me, look, I'm getting in a car, I'm going to go surfing to Rincon with my friends, and I'm 16, I don't know if I would feel very comfortable doing that now. My mother, and I don't know if she had a choice, but I mean, she never gave me too much grief about that, because I think Puerto Rico at that time was much more innocent than it is now. So those are my fondest memories of Puerto Rico. I mean, it influenced me so much that I decided after 18 years of training to come back. Even though I don't have any other than my mother and my brother that are here, my entire family's in Chile. And I could have stayed at the States. I spent 9 years in Chicago, and it was easy for me to just to stay there. But I had so much fun memories from Puerto Rico that it was never a question of staying. When I met my wife in 1992, I told her right off the bat, hey, by the way, you know, when I'm done, I'm going back to Puerto Rico. And I never veered from that decision.
What do you believe most influenced you later as an adult?
I think that the like I said before, the science. I mean, the science teachers here were so good that it really put a spark in me for loving science. And I think that if I didn't have the good times that I did in my science classes, in all the science classes, physics, biology, 8th grade science, if I didn't have the fun that I had with those classes, I don't think I would be a doctor today. And I think that spark was placed there by those awesome teachers that I had back then in St. John's.
How do you feel about SJS turning 100 years old?
Makes me feel old. And I think that's a great thing. I think this school is going to be here for 1,000 years because it's such a good school. But I was doing the math the other day, and Sophia, you're graduating in 2023, and that's 40 years after I graduated. So it's a long time. I never questioned my decision to put you guys in St. John's. It was going to happen one way or the other because of the way that I feel about St. John's is that it forges you as a person better than any other school that I can think of. And I've met people from all the good schools in Puerto Rico, and I don't think that they feel about their school like we feel about ours. And that's something that you take to the grave. So I'm really, really happy that you guys are doing well in this school.
Do you have any unforgettable memories?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was the senior class president, and Jose Dubon was student council president. And I remember that year we planned our senior trip, a cruise in the Carla C. It was an Italian ship. It was cheap, it was old, but it was so much fun. I think more than 2/3 of the class went, and that week there was one of the most fun weeks I've ever had in my life. We felt so big, and we were so small now that I look back on it, but we had so much fun on that trip that it's something that I'm never going to forget. It was a great class because even though we had only 37 students, when we all got together, it was like there was only one group. And we put our differences aside and we had just fun.
And what's your last senior memory from St. John's that you can remember?
I had to do the speech for the senior class graduation, and I was so nervous, so nervous. I stuttered the whole way. The graduation was done at what is now the Vanderbilt Hotel. It used to be the Hotel Condado back then. It was this beautiful ballroom, and we had a really good graduation. I remember my graduation very fondly. I was just talking to my mother about this. She has a box with all my things from St. John's, and I'm sure that if I look for it, I'd probably find that speech.
I looked through that box and I found his report cards from 8th grade. He had all A's, and then he had one like F in like, what's it called, his attitude to the class. And
So I was almost like a class clown back then.
but like a nerdy class clown.
Yeah, I mean, I had good grades, and my mother, she always threatened me, saying, look, I'm spending so much money in your education that if you don't get A's, I'm going to save some money and put you in a worse school. So that threat just inspired me to get A's because I didn't want to leave St. John's. I didn't want to go to a public school. You know, there's a couple of public schools around here that are closer by, and you'll find yourself in one of those schools if you don't make the grade. And that was a great motivator for me to get A's.
In the box, I also found pictures from high school with all his friends that I can recognize because they look like they're children now.
It's a Pandora box, so we have to go through it carefully.
Excellent. Oh, that was so much fun.
Claudio Corral, class of 1983.